Okay. Well, welcome. This is your Anxiety Toolkit podcast. Today, I am lucky to have CBT rock star Shala Nicely. And today, we're going to talk about two really important subjects. The first one being managing shame and guilt. And then the second is how to deal with the common saying, oh, I'm so OCD about that, or I'm so OCD. So I'm going to ask some questions, and Shala is going to give me her absolute rockstar expert opinion on those. So, Shala, you recently wrote a super cool article, which I will post in the show notes, about this idea about being so OCD. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write that article?
Sure, and thank you very much, really, for having me on the show. I'm honored to be here.
Mm.
So, in fact, you were there when I got inspired to write this article. It was when you and I were at the TLC Foundation for Body Focused Repetitive Behaviors conference in St. Louis, and my mom had texted me a picture from a major women's magazine that had a headline on an article that said, "Be a little OCD."
Mm.
And my mom is amazing. She doesn't have OCD, but clearly she knows all about mine. But she didn't for years because my parents didn't know I had it until I was in my 30s, even though I've had it since I was probably 5 or 6. I hid it that time. And since learning about what I went through and how hard it was for me to get treatment and how much I've suffered, my mom has become a huge advocate for raising awareness about OCD and its appropriate treatment, and for helping people understand the damage that can be done by the misuse of the term OCD, by using it casually, by using it as an adjective that means meticulous or neat or fastidious. And so she typically sends me these things and then sends me her responses that she will post online to people saying things like, "I'm so OCD." And she has some very kind but informative responses that she posts. And so she sent me this one and said that she had already sent a letter to the editor. And I remember showing it to you when we were sitting in the hotel lobby. I'm like, I can't believe this. Sometimes, you see "I'm so OCD" or "be a little OCD" on places in social media, and people, I think, don't mean any harm by this. They just don't know what they're saying. But to me, to have a major women's magazine promoting a stereotype that misaligns people who have a very serious mental disorder, I just thought that was the last straw. So I wrote the article in response to that. And I didn't mention the name of the magazine because I didn't think that's relevant. We were going to talk about shame and guilt today. And the last thing that I wanted to do was shame this magazine for having done that. But I wanted to educate people about why that's not appropriate.
Right.
My mom did end up sending, I think, a link to the blog that I wrote, and I think a bunch of other people also let this magazine know. My mom said that recently they posted an article about OCD, and they apologized for having said that. And that's not just because of what I wrote. I think that's because there was an outcry, a general outcry for people that this is not appropriate. So that's why I wrote the article, because I feel very passionate about advocating for people who are suffering, because for so many people with OCD, it is such a shaming disorder. The content of it is very shaming. The compulsions that it makes you do are very shaming. And so people won't tell other people about it. And so people with OCD who are suffering greatly will hear people say this kind of stuff, and it just makes them feel awful, because it makes them feel like, well, gosh, I should just be able to stop all this. If it's such a casual term, people are going to throw it around in conversation. It must not be that big of a deal, and yet I can't stop all these thoughts, and I can't stop doing these ridiculous things. And so I'm passionate about trying to help people to stop using it for that reason. It annoys me to hear it, but I'm not suffering greatly from OCD because I've been through treatment. But people who are suffering, it minimizes what they're going through, and it makes them feel even more ashamed. And that's why I'm so passionate about advocating for not using that term.
Right, absolutely. And thank you for doing that. I loved the article, and I felt like it was right on point, right? And I think you kind of answered the question I was just asking, which is what specific feeling or emotion do you have when you hear that saying, when you hear someone say, "Oh, I'm so OCD about that," like what's your experience of that?
My initial feeling is almost always annoyance because it's a sort of here we go again situation. And, it's hard to determine how to respond to it, honestly. It depends on the situation you're in, who said it, the context, all of that. Sometimes it's appropriate to say something, and many times it's not. And so it's just annoying because it's a lack of understanding of a disorder that's so incredibly disabling, and that I see people suffering from this every day. So the first feeling is annoyance, and then I try to move towards compassion because people don't know what they're saying. They're not meaning to be demeaning. They're not meaning to be mean. They just haven't been educated.
Right.
And so I try to move towards compassion, that they don't mean anything by it.
Right. And what would you say to someone if they said, "Oh, I'm so OCD about that"? Like, what's your specific tactic in terms of educating them on the spot? Like, I hear it all the time, not in my office, but sort of just out and about. Like, I'll say even just last week, I went to the dentist and he's like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm an OCD specialist." He's like, "Oh, yeah, I've got that." And maybe he does, but I'm guessing maybe not, given his easy expression of it. So what would you say to someone when they say something similar to that, or "I'm so OCD"?
So if they say something like "I'm so OCD," I think what I would probably say is, I think a lot of people can relate to what you're saying, is that you feel like you need to be meticulous or neat, but actually OCD is a diagnosable mental disorder that's really quite disabling. In fact, it's the 10th most disabling condition in the world. And I know we all want to be sensitive to other people's suffering, and it might be more appropriate to say, "Gosh, I'm so meticulous," just so that you don't offend anybody with OCD.
Right.
But again, and I think this is hard, and this is an important point, I might not always say that, because it's really important to me not to shame people.
Right.
And it can be really hard, especially in a social situation, if somebody said something like that in a big group. I don't want them to feel shame that they've said something bad. So it's really sort of up in the air whether I will say something, because of the fact that I just don't want to embarrass or shame anybody.
Right. Right. Yeah, I agree. It's a toss up every time for me on how I'm feeling or whether I feel it's appropriate to make the comment. But I agree with you 100% there. Would you say that people who have OCD are so OCD?
That is a great question, and I think I tried to address that point in the blog post that I wrote, because if you look at neatness, being meticulous, being fastidious, that is as you know, an incredibly small portion of people with OCD. In fact, what's really always interesting is to have parents of teenagers come in who have a misunderstanding of OCD, and they'll say, "But my kid's room is a disaster." But yet they can't stop washing their hands. They care about that, but their room looks like a bomb's gone off in it. I'm like, well, yeah, that's pretty typical, right? Because that portion of OCD is just a very small percentage of what people experience. So I think, are people with OCD so OCD? If they have sort of just right, things have to be lined up sort of OCD, then maybe. But I don't think I would ever call them that, because I think what OCD really means is, it means suffering, agony in hell, torture, shamed, isolated, lonely, lost, and at times suicidal. And I don't think anybody would say, "I'm so any of that."
Right. I agree. So thank you for sharing that, and hopefully you can keep spreading the word, and we can share your article as much as we can. And I encourage people, once you see it, to sort of post it on social media. It's the perfect way to educate, instead of doing it in the moment when someone has said, "Oh, I'm so OCD." Just make it be seen I think that's where the change happens. is when it's done non-directly. So hopefully, that you can keep spreading that message, as I will too. So let's sort of segue there into exactly what you stepped on, which is the shame. And this is like one of my favorite favorite and least favorite topics when it comes to treating OCD, just because it's so painful. Is talking about shame related to OCD or any mental health disorder that someone is going through. So what advice would you give to someone, or how would you best manage shame when they're handling a mental health issue?
So I think I look to the work of Brene Brown when we're talking about shame, because I think she's really the goddess of shame and vulnerability research. She's done so much good work, I think, to shine the light on shame and what it is and how you deal with it. So, in following what she says, I think it's important first to start with an understanding of what shame is and how it differs from guilt. And so the way, she defines it is really shame is a fear of disconnection. And if you think about it, at any time that anybody's felt shame, it is sort of like, I'm going to be socially isolated. People are going to push me away. I'm going to be out there by myself with nobody around me. And so it's really that fear of not being part of the group anymore, of not belonging in an irreparable way. And if you look at the difference between shame and guilt, as she defines it, so guilt is, I did something bad. And shame is, I am bad. And so I think if we look at what shame is and start from there, we can understand that it's devaluing our worth as humans. And it's not helpful. It's not a helpful or motivating emotion to have at all. And I think to deal with it, and this is the way I've dealt with it in my own life, again, just learning from what Brene Brown says, I think it's really important first to understand what your shame triggers are, because everybody has shame triggers. For women, it's often physical appearance is one of the big. For men, I think one of the big ones is, they can fear appearing weak. And knowing what your own shame triggers are, I think is really important, just for understanding your own mental health. And then when you have a shaming experience, what shame wants us to do, and again, this is all pulled from Brene's research, what shame wants us to do is isolate and be with that shame and not say anything and keep it inside us. But that's what the shame wants us to do, so that shame can grow. And so what Brene says to do is to break that, basically, and to share it, to go talk to somebody. But what's really important here is to talk to somebody who is a trusted friend or advisor. So your therapist or your best friend, somebody who is good at empathy, somebody who can hear what you're saying and say, gosh, I totally get how you feel. That would be really hard. And maybe even share their own experience of shame with you, so that you understand that what you're experiencing is part of the human experience, that it's not actually isolating, that everybody experiences it and it's okay. And that people still accept you, even throwing the spotlight on your shame and they're knowing about it, they still accept you. So speaking shame to the right people. These are people, like if you had your own personal board of directors, people who you would want to help direct your life, these are the kind of people you take the shame to, so that they can really help share it and shed light on it and tell you it's okay.
Right. And I like that. I always sort of say the same thing, in that we have to shine a light on shame instead of keep it in the dark. And Brene Brown speaks about figuring out who you can trust. Did you see her talk on that, in terms of that you have a jar, and her daughter at school had a jar, and the teacher would put in a marble every time they did something well, and when the marble was filled, they get a pizza party, I think it was. And she said to treat trust like that. Like if you go and you tell like you said, the board of directors, that someone who you would invite to be on your board would be someone who has consistently put in a marble for trustworthy things that they have done. And I think that is so powerful in knowing who you share your shame with. Yeah.
I agree.
Cool. Okay. And so, what about guilt? Like, how would you shift your management of guilt particularly regarding, we're speaking about today, like mental health? Because often there's shame for having the disorder, but then there's guilt for how much time and how much it's affected their lives, whether it be, you've missed your grandmother's birthday party because you're doing compulsions, or you couldn't eat your own wedding cake because you had an eating disorder and you weren't able to even savor your own wedding cake, or if you're a hair puller or a skin picker, that you didn't go to your brother's graduation because you were afraid of the damage you had done. So how would you handle guilt in that situation?
And I'm glad you brought this up, because I think that, especially with these disorders that you're talking about, there is so much guilt, because you feel like you should be able to stop whatever it is. You should be able to stop hair pulling, or you should just be able to make yourself eat it, or you should just be able to stop your compulsions, and you can't. And you feel like you are impacting yourself and other people because of that. And I think that's where the guilt comes from. And I think this is where self-compassion is incredibly important, because what we do without self-compassion with guilt is we just beat ourselves up. We say, gosh, I wasn't able to be at this particular family event, and that's terrible, and what's wrong with me, and I need to try harder, and gosh, if I could just get over this, and I'm just going to beat myself up, and that'll motivate me more. And what that does, and this all comes from the research of Kristen Neff, who's done so much work on self-compassion, is that just demotivates us. I always give my clients the example of, if you have two small children, little Tommy and little Susie, and every time little Tommy raises his hand, the teacher says, little Tommy, what is wrong with you? Come on, you didn't even pay attention. That is not the right answer. You just need to try harder. Get it together. But every time little Susie raises her hand to answer, the teacher says, well, little Susie, that was such a good try. And I could tell you're really thinking about this. It's not the right answer, but that's okay. You just keep trying. And I ask my clients, I'm like, eventually, who's going to stop at, answering questions? And of course, it's little Tommy. And I say, well, when you beat yourself up, you're treating yourself like little Tommy. And eventually, you're just going to give up. And so I think in our country, we have this characteristic of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. Like, America has been made from all the work of these hard-working colonial people and pioneers, and we just need to work hard, and just push ourselves. And if you don't work hard enough, just beat yourself up and work harder. And I think that that's not the right way to go in a lot of situations. Is we need to instead say, you know what, I'm feeling really guilty right now. And, I bet a lot of people with trichotillomania, who've had a hard time stopping the pulling, would feel like I feel right now. And you know what? I am going to give myself a break. I'm going to recognize that, hey, this is a good time to use self-compassion. I'm going to give myself permission to feel guilty right now, but not to wallow in it. I'm going to instead do something helpful for myself. I'm maybe going to go, pick up a new fidget and try something new, go back and talk to my therapist about it, and treat myself like I would treat my best friend. And I think the majority of the time, saying something like that, it's like we absolve ourselves of the guilt. We're saying it's okay. I feel guilty. Okay, I feel guilty. That's okay. And I'm going to be kind to myself and say that what's really helpful for me is to treat myself like little Susie and say, you did a really good job that time. We may not have gotten what we wanted, but hey, you can do it the next time. This is okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's how you treat guilt. That's been really helpful for me, is to treat it with self-compassion.
Yeah. And be very aware of when we push ourselves then into shame. Like, we're in guilt and we push it in. Okay, so this doesn't feel good. I'll push it into shame. And I feel bad that I did that. So now I'm just going to push myself into, I am a bad person. And so I think you're right. In the two steps you said with both is just to recognize when it comes up, right? Like, oh, shame's here. Oh, guilt just showed up, right? And catch ourselves pushing it into the other, bouncing back and forward.
And I think especially for people who have OCD, one of the core fears for anyone who has OCD is, I'm a bad person. And when we get into the mode of shame and we start agreeing with the shame that, yes, I'm a bad person, Now we're playing OCD's game too. So we're just giving OCD more fuel for its fire because we're saying with certainty, yes, I'm bad and I don't deserve nice things. And, I just need to sit over here by myself. And that's exactly where OCD is thriving. And so we don't want to give any OCD any more power too by giving into that shame in that way.
Right. Absolutely. Cool. Exactly. Okay. So let's talk about, in terms of empowerment, is how would you, I speak with this a lot with my clients, but how would you use the diagnosis and the physical experiences of whatever mental health disorder or illness they have, how do you use that, knowing that diagnosis and everything that goes with it, to help empower somebody?
So I think that empowerment is just so key when you're looking at mental health issues. And I work the most with OCD, and I see how disempowering OCD is. I mean, it's a very aggressive disorder. It's got a very harsh, critical voice. It takes all the power and makes people feel like they're incapable of doing the things that they need to do. I think if we go back to self-compassion, I think we need to be really kind to ourselves in terms of, I have this diagnosis, I have OCD, for instance. Being kind to ourselves, just like if you got a diagnosis of asthma or cancer or almost any other medical condition, people would be very unlikely to beat themselves up for that. They may feel disempowered just because of the power of the problem, the cancer or whatever, but many people are not going to sit there and say, gosh, I did this, this is my fault. Whereas with mental illness, which I think is really sort of miscategorized, I think eventually we'll just look at it all as illness, because I think most of these mental illnesses are biologically based. We just don't understand that yet. And when we do, they'll be called medical illnesses. But I think if we look at them all as we would a medical illness and say, well, great, it's good I have this diagnosis because now I know what to do about it. Because without a diagnosis, you can't get the right treatment. And I'm going to be kind to myself about having this, and work with my therapist to get the tools I need so that I am empowered to take care of it. Because especially, with OCD, the anxiety disorders, we have really good treatment for them. If you get to the right therapist, and you can really take your life back.
Right. Good. I love it. And so I always throw this at people, and I haven't done this with I call them my OCD or my CBT rock stars, but what is your absolute favorite mindfulness tool or skill? What's your best?
So, gosh, if I have to pick just one, there are so many that I like, but I have to pick just one. I will right now pick Dan Harris's 10% Happier app. So he calls it meditation for fidgety skeptics. I love that because I think that he is addressing what makes meditation hard for not just people who have mental illness, but everybody, is to sit and be still in our culture is almost unheard of. We're all constantly moving and doing things and being stimulated by social media and this, that, and the other. And so we are fidgety and we are sort of skeptical. Like, is this some sort of woo-woo thing where, I'm going to have light come out of my head and it's going to be this weird experience? And so I think what Dan Harris does in this app that I love is he takes a lot of the leaders in the mindfulness meditation movement, people like Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg, and he interviews them in these little bitty clips. So each day I'll listen to one little clip. It's like 3 or 4 minutes. And it's always a really practical question, like, well, what do we do about the fact that we sit here during the meditation thinking, God, I cannot wait till this is over. And then, Joseph Goldstein will take 3 or 4 minutes and talk about that. And it's always very practical and usable in a real world space, in a space where we might be meditating on the subway in the morning. We're not getting a chance to even sit on a cushion. It's just we're doing it where we can. And so I like it because it's very down to earth. It's very usable and it's very funny. He makes this stuff really enjoyable because he he like channels the fidgety skeptic, and does a really good job of asking the questions that you really want to know the answers to.
Right, right. And I think the beauty of that, and I love that you use that as your favorite, is because when they voice the skeptic, we tend to be less shaming and feel guilty for the fact that we have that. Like that's going to happen. But if no one explains that's going to happen, we immediately think we're doing it wrong and it's dumb, or too hard or whatever it might be. And I think that bringing up the skeptic takes out all of the guilt and the shame and the negativity around the fact that that's what's going to happen, and then you kind of go in easy, right? I love that.
And his book too, if anybody hasn't heard it, his 10% Happier book, which if you get on Audible, he actually narrates it. And because he's a broadcaster, he's got a fabulous voice. And as he's telling his own story, you can hear all his emotions in his voice. It's a fabulous listen. Right. So I recommend that as well.
Yeah, I didn't listen to it. That's actually, I love when the author reads the audio book. I love that. I think it just gives you the passion underneath it. Right. Okay. Excellent. So one of the other main things I was really excited about having you on is I wanted you to share, I wanted you to share a little bit about what your new endeavors are, and because that sort of speaks to the topic of today in terms of outreach and taking out, shame and guilt and all of the hard, very, very difficult parts of having a mental illness. So do you want to share with us a little bit about your endeavors?
Sure. So I can talk about a couple. One is Fred in the Refrigerator. So 4 years ago, I gave the keynote at the International OCD Foundation Conference, which I titled as Fred in the Refrigerator. And it was really done as a form of oral storytelling. So I learned this from my mother, who actually has a master's degree in storytelling, believe it or not, in the art of oral storytelling. So I did it based on what I had learned from her to help people understand what I went through, because I've had OCD since I was 5 or 6, started seeing therapists when I was 16, and saw therapists, mental health professionals on and off. Until my 30s, and did not hear about exposure therapy until I went to the IOCDF conference in 2010. So it was, more than 30 years from the time that I started having symptoms, and more than 20 years from the time that I, started seeing therapists. And again, I just wanted to highlight the problem I think that we have in this country and probably worldwide with OCD not being picked up by mental health and medical health professionals, and getting the correct treatment. So what I'm doing with that is I have turned it into a book, and I've tried to make it's my memoir, obviously, but I've tried to make it a gripping story. And the OCD is the villain in the story, and I'm the protagonist, and it's sort of the two of us sort of going at it each chapter, trying to figure out who's going to be on top. And so I have finished that, and I'm now working with a company on that. We're working on the editing. And that's really, really important to me, because I am fine telling people that I have OCD. In fact, I have more than just OCD. I have body dysmorphic disorder as well. I've had depression on and off. I had an eating disorder that was actually really a ritual of BDD. That I didn't even realize that's what was happening. That was when I was in college. I didn't realize that's what it was until a couple of years ago, in fact, when I was doing reading on BDD and realized, oh, wow, they're talking about what I did. So, I have a lot going on in terms of mental health conditions. And I'm okay sharing that with people, because I want to reduce the shame that people have around this, because, it's not my fault I have all this. I just have all this. And people with OCD and related disorders, including trichotillomania and skin picking disorder, there tend to be comorbidity there. So it's unusual to find somebody who just has one of those. People typically almost always they have depression, and a lot of times they have something else, another anxiety disorder or body-focused repetitive behavior. So it's really important to me in this endeavor to put my book Fred out there to help people understand what it feels like to have OCD, what it feels like to have BDD, what it feels like to go to therapists who don't know what they're doing and who do things that make it worse. And that it's okay. It's okay to have all this. It's okay to go to tell somebody about it. It's okay to go get treatment, because I want people to not suffer like I did, because I suffered for years and years and years. So this is my main endeavor that I'm most passionate about. And right now the book is scheduled to be out at the beginning of next year. So we'll see how that
Oh,
goes.
I can't wait.
Thank you. Me too. Another endeavor I'm working on is with Jeff Bell, so our company Beyond the Doubt. So something new that we've done in the past couple months that we really are passionate about is our Keywords project. So it's daily motivation to thrive with OCD. So each weekday, Monday through Friday, we send out an email to subscribers that has a motivational quote. And then we take the quote and we turn it into an OCD recovery tip. So how can you apply what this person is saying to your daily life with OCD? And then we give an additional resource that may be directly related to OCD, or may just be something fun and interesting that people would enjoy. And that has been so much fun for us, because what we're doing is we're using our 4 keys. So that's something that Jeff and I came up with, that we use to manage our own OCD. It's a wrapper around exposure therapy, a motivational wrapper. And so we will relate each of the quotes to one of the 4 keys as well. So it's really fun for us, because we're very passionate about the 4 keys. We both use them constantly, and it's really fun to tie these quotes into them and to help other people see how to use them to better their own recoveries from OCD. So that's been really fun to get the word out about that. And it's just a free service that we do. And it's really fun just to put something out there that hopefully is helping people to be able to take back their lives.
Right. No, I receive it every morning of the week, Monday through Friday, and I love it, because the truth is, it doesn't have to just apply to OCD. It applies to whatever you're working through. Some of the quotes just resonate with me just getting to work, you know what I mean? In terms of, oh, I needed that this morning. So I think that's the beauty of it, is it spreads further than just OCD.
And I'm so glad you like it too. I've had some other people who are my therapist friends who don't have OCD that say, "Oh gosh, I really like that quote."
Yeah, absolutely. And the links are really cool. Really, really cool.
So if people would like to sign up for that, they just go to beyondthedoubt.com/keywords, and they can find that. And then finally, in endeavors, so John Hirschfield and I, John's the reason that you and I met. He's been trying to hook us up as friends for a while.
I'm so pleased that he did.
I am too. And so John's and my book is coming out in, October 1st. So Everyday Mindfulness for OCD. And that's been a really, really fun project to get to work with John on, is to talk about, what is mindfulness? How do you apply it to OCD? What is self-compassion? How do you play games with ERP and OCD? How do you really turn the tables on OCD and play some pretty funny games with it to keep it from playing not so funny games with you? So that's going to be coming out in a couple months, and that's been really exciting and a really fun project to work on.
Right, and probably my favorite OCD book I've ever read.
Oh, thank you.
Mainly because it's totally doable. You could pick it up and read a page and feel empowered. It's a very empowering book and very freeing, I found. I found it to be, very uplifting. Some OCD books can make us feel like you're going deeper into the scary pieces before you come out at the end, but I felt like it just kept raising me up as I read it. So I'm so excited for you guys to have that come out.
Thank you. We are too.
Right. Yeah, I'm very cool. And is there anything else? I mean, that's enough. You've got plenty going on. But is there anything else you want to... of course, I will share in the show notes also your website. So where is the best place for people to reach you if they have questions?
2 places. So beyondthedoubt.com, you can always reach me or Jeff Bell through that site. And then my website, shalanicely.com, you can always reach me through there as well. I also have a new blog on Psychology Today that I do with Jeff, and it's in the personal perspectives section. So it's an inside look at living with OCD. And so I'll write blog posts about my OCD and I living mostly a good existence together, but sometimes my OCD forgets that I'm in charge. So I just started doing this a couple months ago, and I wrote a blog about what my OCD and I were packing for our trip to France.
I love
a specific packing list when you have OCD. And then the blog post after that was what my OCD and I learned in France.
I read the one that where you packed, so I need to include that link too because I thought that was super helpful in terms of, getting ready to go away from your safe home. I think it's super super appropriate and fun read.
Good. Well, thank you. And I have another one actually that probably won't get posted till after IOCDF since that's next week, but try to do that, at least once a month, if not more frequently, to just give inside perspective on what it's like to live with a little monster.
Right. You are an OCD rock star, OCD CBT rock star. It's incredible. Thank you for doing all that. It's so much work.
It's so much fun though. It's I think really meaningful for me, and this is what Jeff and I always say, is that it gives me meaning in the suffering that I went through. If I'm able to use what I went through to help other people, it makes it all worthwhile. And I think that's why I'm so passionate and want to do all these different things, is because I don't want people to experience what I did. I want people to get treatment a whole lot faster than I did.
Right. Yeah, and just I know we're finishing up, but that also speaks to like how you handle the guilt and the shame. Like you transform it into change. Like if the having, going through what you've been through and you've not that everyone has to go out and do all these incredible things that you're doing, but you shifted it to a purpose, which I think is so so incredible.
Thank you. It's made a huge difference. And here's my kitty. He wants to come be a part of this.
You did say that he or she was going to visit at some point.
Yeah. Yes, he loves to be a part of this.
I'm so glad. Well, thank you so much. I'm all out of main questions. I could go on for hours, but I'm going to let you go. So thank you so much for speaking with us all. Shame has been something I've wanted to speak about on the podcast for some time, and I have briefly spoke about it, but I feel like it just has to keep getting addressed. So I'm so glad that we got time to do that. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much again for having me on the show. I'm honored and delighted to be here. It's always fun to talk with you.
Oh, I'm so glad. And I will see you at the conference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very short.
Right. Just for the listeners to know, the IOCDF has a yearly conference in a different city each year. If you want more information, go to iocdf.com. Or is it org.com?
I think it's...
Yeah, iocdf.org for information, which I will post as well. Okay. All right. Thank you.